Yarden Voss hadn't planned on stepping out of his black Escalade in the middle of a dusty fairground surrounded by food trucks and makeshift stages, but there he was, million-dollar watch catching the sunlight, wildly out of place in Italian leather shoes. "This is definitely not Cannes," he muttered, adjusting his sunglasses as the sharp twang of a fiddle sliced through the summer air. His assistant had double-booked his weekend, and instead of sipping champagne at a private villa in Monaco, Yarden found himself at the Cedar Falls Summer Sound Festival in rural Oregon, honoring a promise to a longtime business partner who sponsored the event. He glanced around, unimpressed, until something, or rather, someone caught his attention. She was barefoot, literally barefoot. Her dark jeans were rolled at the ankles, a guitar strapped lazily across her back, and her wild chestnut curls framed a face so open it made him forget to breathe for a second. She was laughing at something, tossing her head back like there wasn't a care in the world. And then she looked at him. Their eyes locked, as cool, curious. Hers bold, amused. She tilted her head, clearly noticing the way he stuck out like a sore thumb. "You lost or just overdressed?" she asked as she walked up, one brow raised. He fought a rare smile. "Both, apparently." "Thought so." She held out her hand. "Jessa Albright. I'm on at 4. You." "Yarden." "Just Yarden. My last name's Voss," he added, watching her expression change ever so slightly. "You're not the Voss from Vostech, are you?" "Guilty." She gave a mock gasp. "Wow. I didn't think billionaires came to places with bad cell service and corn dogs." "I'm actually just a millionaire," he said dryly. "Billionaires are at least smart enough to stay out of mud." She laughed again, and something about the sound made his chest tighten. "Stick around, Mr. Millionaire. You might surprise yourself." He did. Yarden stayed for her entire set, standing near the back, one hand in his pocket, sunglasses still on. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Raw. The kind of sound that didn't try to impress you, it just told the truth. And she didn't look at anyone else, not once. Every song, every lyric, every glance was aimed at him. When she stepped off stage, cheeks flushed and eyes bright, he was already waiting near the side with a lemonade in each hand. "You looked like you were dying up there," he said, handing her one. "I was on fire, actually," she shot back, taking a long drink. "Lemonade's terrible here. I'll buy you a better one." "Oh yeah? You gonna fly us to Italy for the good stuff?" "I could." She blinked, like maybe she wasn't sure if he was joking. He wasn't. Instead, he offered his arm. "But for now, let's settle for the food truck with the shortest line." They walked the grounds together, sharing loaded fries and fried pickles, and talking about everything from her music to his company. He didn't tell her how much he was worth. He didn't have to. She wasn't the type to be impressed by money. "Do you actually like this stuff?" he asked as she dipped another fry in ranch. "I love it," she said, eyes soft. "It's real." Music, food, people. Even the mess. That night, he sat on a hay bale, blazer tossed over his shoulder, watching her dance barefoot in a circle of strangers under string lights. Something cracked open in him. Something he hadn't realized was even there. Later, when things quieted and they sat on a blanket near the edge of the field, she looked up at him and asked, "So what's a guy like you really doing here?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe you needed to feel something again," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes dark. "And what if I already am?" She didn't look away. "Then maybe you should stay a little longer." He did. Yarden canceled his flight the next morning, booked a private cabin nearby, and kept showing up. Every day. For her. They shared late-night bonfires, duets under the stars, and quiet moments that didn't need words. She called him out when he tried to hide behind charm, and he listened when she talked about her dreams of producing her own album, even though she couldn't afford studio time. "I've spent money on dumber things," he said one night, reaching into his wallet. She pulled back. "Don't. I need to do it on my own." He didn't argue. He just stared at her like she was the first thing that had ever made sense to him. And then, on the 5th night, after one too many shared glances and almost kisses, she finally grabbed his shirt and pulled him down to her, pressing her lips to his like she'd been holding her breath for days. When they broke apart, breathless, she whispered, "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. He didn't leave the next morning. Or the one after that. And when the festival wrapped, he found himself at a crossroads he hadn't seen coming. But it was Jessa who said it first. "I don't want this to end," she said quietly as they stood beside her beat-up truck, the last of the tents coming down behind them. "Then don't let it. I don't belong in your world, Yarden." He took her hands. "Then I'll come to yours." She pulled in a shaky breath. "Are you serious?" "I haven't been this serious about anything in years." And she believed him. Because in that moment, under the fading lights of the festival, surrounded by the scent of dirt and cotton candy, Yarden Voss, the millionaire who came for a meeting, realized he'd found something worth staying for. Her. The first morning after the festival ended, the town of Cedar Falls returned to its usual rhythm, slow and deliberate. The makeshift stages were gone. The food trucks had rolled out, and the field where music once echoed now sat silent beneath a sky that threatened rain. But Yarden didn't leave. He stood in front of a weathered cafe on Main Street, pushing open the door with one hand while balancing a tray of coffees in the other. The bell above the door rang out, and a few heads turned, unfamiliar with the sight of a man in a tailored wool coat and polished boots strolling into their local haunt. Jessa was already inside, seated at a corner table with papers spread out in front of her and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her eyes lifted when he approached, and a slow smile grew across her face, not surprised, not questioning, just quietly pleased. "You're becoming alarmingly punctual," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I didn't want to risk you finishing your coffee without me," he replied, setting hers in front of her before taking the seat across. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat soak into her fingers. "I'm working on lyrics. They're coming out a little jagged. Let me hear them." Her brows rose. "You're not exactly my target audience." "I'm not trying to be," he said, leaning in. "I just want to know what's in your head." She hesitated, then pushed the notebook toward him. The lines were raw, uneven. Words scratched out and replaced, phrases circled, arrows pointing to nowhere. He read in silence. After a long moment, he looked up. "This part," he said, tapping a line near the bottom. "It's brutal. And brilliant." Jessa looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "It's about someone I used to love. Or thought I did." "Want to tell me?" "I was 17. He was 25. Thought he was the moon, the stars, and the road between. Turns out he was just a detour." Yarden studied her. "He hurt you?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "I let myself believe in a version of him that didn't exist. That's on me." He nodded slowly. "We've all done that. Built castles out of fog." Her expression shifted, thoughtful. "What about you? Ever been in love?" "I thought I was once. But it felt like standing still in a burning house, too afraid to move, too stubborn to leave." Jessa traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "That's not love. That's survival." "Exactly." They sat in silence for a beat, the air between them heavier now but not uncomfortable. Then she asked, "What happens when you go back?" "I haven't decided I will." "Yarden, come on. You don't belong here." "I didn't think I did. Then I met you." She shook her head, eyes down. "You can't want this. A town with one grocery store and no Uber." He leaned forward. "You think I care about that? I've had every convenience money can buy. You know what I've never had? A reason to wake up somewhere that didn't feel like a boardroom." Her gaze flicked to his. "You don't even like country music." "I didn't." She looked at him for a long second, then stood. "Come with me." Outside, the wind had picked up. She led him down the street, past a hardware store and a mural of faded sunflowers, until they reached an old brick building with peeling paint. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked the door. Inside was a modest studio, dim and a little dusty, but filled with instruments and soundproofed walls. A small recording booth stood in one corner, and a worn-out couch sat beneath a cracked window. "This is where I come when I want to feel like I'm going somewhere," she said quietly. "The equipment's secondhand. Half of it doesn't work right. But it's mine." He stepped inside, taking it all in. "You recorded anything here?" "A few demos. Nothing polished." I can't afford the kind of production it takes to get noticed. He turned to her. Let me help. No, she said firmly, crossing her arms. I meant what I said. I'm not a project. I'm not offering because I think you need saving. I'm offering because I believe in what you're doing. She tilted her head. Would you believe in it if I wasn't sleeping in a twin bed above my aunt's garage? I'd believe in it even if you didn't want me here. That stopped her. Her jaw tightened, then softened. You're not used to hearing no, are you? I'm used to people pretending yes is their idea, he said. But I'd rather have your honesty than anyone else's approval. She turned away, fiddling with the dials on a mixing board. I don't know what this is between us, Yarden. Feels like a dream. It's not, he said, stepping closer. But I'll admit it's the first time I've felt awake in years. Her shoulders dropped, the tension easing. You're not making this easier. I don't want easy. I want real. She nodded, still facing the equipment. If I say yes, to your help, to all of it, I don't want you running when things get messy. I grew up in mess. I built an empire to escape it. But I've realized I'd rather have messy with meaning than perfect with emptiness. She turned slowly, eyes searching his. Then you should know I'm not always kind when I'm scared. I push. I don't bend, he said. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Later that afternoon, he brought her to the cabin he'd rented, a secluded place with wide windows and an old fireplace. She stepped inside, arms folded, taking it all in. You're not exactly roughing it, she muttered. No, he said. But I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could think. And what have you decided? He walked to the window, watching the trees sway. That staying here might be the smartest thing I've ever done. Jessa wrapped her arms around herself. You're not playing fair. I'm not playing anything, he said, turning back to her. I'm trying to build something that doesn't vanish when I leave. She took a step forward. Then don't leave. I won't, he said, unless you ask me to. Her voice was barely a whisper. I just need to know you won't disappear when it gets hard. I won't disappear, he said, but I will fight. For you. For whatever this turns into. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by cedar and silence, she nodded. Not because it was easy, but because it felt like the beginning of something neither of them were ready for but both of them needed. The sky opened up 2 days later, a soaking rain that turned the gravel paths of Cedar Falls into thick ribbons of mud. Yarden stood on the porch of Jessa's aunt's garage apartment, water dripping from the brim of his baseball cap. He had no idea what he was doing here, standing in a borrowed hoodie, holding a cardboard box under one arm, his shoes ruined. Jessa opened the door, her hair damp from running between buildings. You look like a man who trusted a weather app. I thought it was supposed to clear up. That app's been lying since February. She stepped aside, letting him in. He set the box down on the small kitchen table. I brought something. She peeled off her jacket, curiosity in her eyes. If it's another coffee machine, I swear it's not. He pulled out a stack of old vinyl records, each in surprisingly good condition. I found them at a thrift shop on the edge of town. Thought you might want to sample them. Her mouth parted slightly. You're kidding. Nope. I went through every milk crate in that place. A few of them are original pressings. She eased one out of the sleeve with reverent fingers, then looked at him. You did this for me? I had an hour to kill and a sudden craving for dusty basements. I don't even have a record player. I do, he said, pulling a small vintage turntable from the bottom of the box. Well, I bought one. She leaned her back against the counter, smiling in disbelief. This is thoughtful. Unexpected, but thoughtful. Yarden stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as he adjusted the tone arm. You said once that music's about truth. I figured this might help you find a few new ones. She gave a small nod, then turned toward the window. You know, when you first showed up, I thought you'd be gone in a day. I thought the same. But now you're here. In a hoodie. Buying records in antique stores. Her voice softened. Do you ever worry you're losing pieces of yourself? He considered that for a moment. I think I'm finding the ones I forgot I had. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the couch, pulled a blanket over her lap, and gestured for him to sit. The record began to spin, a low hum rising as the needle found the groove. I used to sit like this with my dad, she said quietly. He had this habit of humming along even when he didn't know the song. Yarden watched her face change, the memory tugging something tender from her. Where is he now? Passed. A couple years back. Lung cancer. She glanced down. He taught me 3 chords on the guitar and said that was enough to make people feel something. I didn't believe him until he was gone. He reached out, resting his hand lightly over hers. I'm sorry. It's strange, isn't it? She said. How someone can be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He didn't speak. He just listened. The rain kept falling, steady and sure. They spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch, flipping through records, taking turns choosing songs. Some were scratchy, others off-key, but Jessa sang along anyway, her voice low and imperfect in the best way. As evening slipped into dusk, she turned to him. I've been offered a spot in a showcase. Portland. End of the month. His brows lifted. That's huge. It's a small venue. No guarantees. But it's something. What do you need? A band. A few new tracks. Maybe a miracle. I can help you build it. I know you can. But should you? Yarden leaned forward. What does that mean? She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. You've made space for me in your world. But I don't want to become someone who only exists when you're looking. You think that's what this is? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I do know that if I'm going to stand on a stage and mean it, I need to get there on my own legs. He studied her. Not the way she looked, but the way she held herself like someone who'd been broken before and learned how to rebuild. I don't want to be your shortcut, she said. You're not, he replied. You're the reason I slowed down. That silenced her. The next day, they drove to the studio. Not the small one in town, but a larger space an hour out, tucked behind a vineyard and surrounded by empty fields. It wasn't glamorous, but it had what they needed. Yarden had quietly arranged a session with a sound engineer and rented the space for 3 weeks. He didn't tell her how much it cost. Jessa walked through the doors like someone stepping into a dream she hadn't dared speak aloud. She ran her fingers along the mixing board, her eyes wide at the sight of the isolation booths and floor mics. This is real, she said. It is. They spent the day recording scratch vocals, testing arrangements, and laying down the skeleton of what would become her set. Jessa was relentless, pushing herself, redoing takes, adjusting harmonies. Yarden watched her work with the kind of focus that made everything else irrelevant. At one point, during a break, she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, sweat on her brow, and a bottle of water in her hand. Why are you still here? She asked. Because I want to be. You don't even like staying in one place. Maybe I just hadn't found the right one. She looked over at him, her voice quiet. You're not afraid this won't go anywhere? I'm more afraid of what I'd miss if I left. She didn't reply, but the look in her eyes was louder than any answer. Days passed like that. Music, long drives, shared meals that never made it to plates. They didn't talk about labels or definitions. They just existed in the same space, orbiting each other with a pull neither of them wanted to resist. Until the phone call. He stepped out of the studio mid-session, answering on instinct. His assistant's voice crackled through the line. Yarden, you've been invited to the Zurich summit. You're on the board now. They've scheduled you for a keynote. It's a big deal. When? In 4 days. He hung up before responding. When he walked back in, Jessa was sitting on a stool, strumming softly, a new melody forming. She looked up at him, reading his face faster than he could hide anything. You're leaving, aren't you? I don't know. But he did. And so did she. The silence between them stretched until she looked down and said, then let's finish the song. Jessa didn't walk him to the car. She stayed inside the studio, headphones still around her neck, pretending to adjust the gain levels on a track she'd already finalized 3 hours ago. Yarden paused at the door, keys in hand as if waiting for something to shift her voice, her step toward him, anything. But she didn't turn and he didn't ask her to. By the time he reached the airstrip, the sky had darkened into a thick, unforgiving gray. The rain hadn't let up since morning. His pilot gave a tight nod, already prepping the jet, but Yarden didn't move past the tarmac. He stared down at the puddles collecting near the wheels, his reflection warped and unsteady. He hadn't packed a bag. Hadn't even told Jessa how long he'd be gone? "You're an idiot," he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair. Inside the jet, the cabin lights flickered on, bathing the leather seats in a sterile glow. He didn't climb aboard. Instead, he pulled out his phone not to call his assistant, not to check the Zurich itinerary, but to scroll through the voicemails Jessa had left him weeks ago. There weren't many. 2, maybe 3. One of them was an acoustic draft of a song she'd recorded in her aunt's garage. Her voice broke halfway through the chorus, and she'd laughed at the end, saying, "Don't judge me. I'll get it right tomorrow." He'd listened to it more times than he wanted to admit. The pilot stepped out, shielding himself from the rain. "We need to lift off in the next 20 minutes or we'll lose the window." Yarden looked up, rain streaking down his jaw. "Cancel it." "Sir, cancel the flight." He didn't wait for the man to argue. He turned on his heel, headed back to the SUV, and peeled out of the airstrip like something had caught fire in his chest. By the time he reached the studio again, it was well past midnight. The lights were still on. He pushed the door open slowly, heart pounding like he'd just stepped into a stadium instead of a one-room building filled with tangled cables and empty coffee cups. Jessa sat at the piano, shoulders hunched, her fingers resting on the keys but unmoving. She didn't look up. "I thought you'd be gone by now," she said. "I was," he replied. "But I couldn't." She finally turned, her eyes unreadable. "Is this guilt or regret?" "Neither. It's clarity." Jessa stood, folding her arms. "You don't owe me anything, Yarden. I never asked you to stay. And I never asked you to make me feel like this," he said, stepping closer. "But you did. You made me want more than numbers and boardrooms and private flights to nowhere." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He kept talking, voice low but firm. "I stood on that tarmac thinking about everything I've built and realized none of it mattered if I couldn't tell you that I'm in love with you." The words landed like a thunderclap. Jessa backed up a step, her palm pressed to her chest. "Don't do that. Don't say it just because you think it'll fix things." "I'm not trying to fix anything," he said. "I'm trying to start something real." She shook her head, eyes rimmed with disbelief. "You don't even know what my life looks like outside of a studio or a festival stage. I have a part-time job cleaning cabins. My car doesn't start unless I hit the dashboard twice. My idea of a splurge is a grilled cheese with 2 types of cheese." "I know," he said quietly. "And I love that you still show up every day like none of that defines you." Her voice cracked. "You're not supposed to love me. I didn't plan on it." He took her hand then finally, and something in her collapsed. Not in defeat, but in surrender. A soft, breathless surrender that let her lean in without needing to brace herself. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. But if you leave again," he cupped her face, "then I'll deserve every song you write about me." That made her laugh, wet and sharp, and she leaned her forehead against his chest. "You're the worst kind of temptation. I'd rather be the best kind of choice." They stood like that until the rain eased, the silence between them no longer heavy but full, like a held breath finally exhaled. In the days that followed, they worked like they were running out of time. Jessa finished the final tracks for the showcase, pouring everything she had into each note. Yarden made no grand gestures, no sweeping purchases. Instead, he showed up every day bringing food, writing grant proposals for the studio, connecting her with musicians who owed him favors but didn't know why he was cashing them in. He watched her rehearse with a fierceness that stole his breath. Not because she was perfect, but because she was relentless. Every missed beat, every off-key harmony, she owned it and kept going. On the night of the showcase, the venue in Portland buzzed with chatter. It wasn't a massive crowd, but it was the right one: agents, producers, local press. Jessa stood backstage, adjusting the strap on her guitar, her fingers trembling. Yarden found her there just before she stepped into the light. "You okay?" he asked. "I feel like I'm about to jump off a cliff. Then fly." She turned, kissed him quick, sure, full of everything she couldn't say. "You're here," she whispered. "Always." When she walked out onto that stage, the room quieted. She didn't start with a greeting. She just played. The first chord rang out like a heartbeat, and then she sang. Not just with her voice, with her whole being. Every word was lived in, every lyric a confession. And when she reached the final verse of the last song, the one she'd finished at 2 in the morning after Yarden had come back, she looked straight at him in the crowd and sang like no one else existed. By the end, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, she found him outside, leaning against the rental car, tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "Well?" she asked. "Marry me." Jessa blinked. "What?" "I don't want to leave this city tonight without knowing I'm yours. Not just for a week. For all of it." "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She stared at him, breath-catching, the glow of the street lamp casting gold across her face. "Yes," she said. "But not because you asked. Because I was going to say it first." He laughed, pulling her into him as the crowd from the venue spilled out behind them and the world kept turning. She'd stolen his heart the moment she sang barefoot beneath string lights in a muddy field. And he'd never wanted it back. The courthouse in Cedar Falls had no marble columns or gold trim. It was modest, with faded white shutters and creaky wooden floors that echoed with every step. But to Jessa, it might as well have been a cathedral. She stood in front of the clerk's desk in a pale blue dress with sleeves that fluttered at her elbows, her hands linked with Yarden's. He wore a black button-down shirt open at the collar, a silver watch peeking from his sleeve, and a quiet look of awe that hadn't left his face since she'd walked in. "Are you sure you want it here?" she whispered. "I want it where you are," he said, eyes never leaving hers. The clerk smiled gently and handed them the license. "You can sign just there, and the judge will be with you in a moment." They stepped aside, pen in hand. Yarden signed first, his signature bold and deliberate. Jessa followed, her fingers shaking slightly as she wrote her name beside his. "I've never been one for tradition," she said as they waited. "But this feels like the only thing that makes sense." Yarden touched a curl that had fallen loose near her temple. "I've stood in rooms full of world leaders and never felt more certain than I do right now." The judge arrived with little fanfare, a kind woman in her 60s with a kind face and a voice like warm tea. She led them to a small chamber lined with dusty law books and a single vase of daisies on the table behind her. "Ready?" she asked. They nodded. The ceremony was short but not rushed. Each word was intentional. When Jessa looked into Yarden's eyes and repeated her vows, her voice didn't waver. When he answered, he didn't blink, didn't falter, didn't try to hide the way his voice deepened at the end. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jessa exhaled like she'd been holding that breath her entire life. Yarden kissed her with both hands on her waist and a quiet reverence that made the judge look away with a small smile. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The air smelled like pine and pavement, and the sun was just starting to break through the clouds. They didn't need a reception or a first dance. Instead, they drove to the hill just outside town where the festival had been held, now empty except for the wildflowers already growing back through the earth. Jessa kicked off her shoes and walked barefoot across the grass, Yarden trailing behind her. "You know," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "we never had a first date. We had about 20 almost dates. I think I want one now." He stopped where he stood. "Right now. Why not?" She sat down on the grass, legs crossed beneath her, and looked up at him expectantly. "Ask me." He lowered himself beside her, stretching his legs out and leaning back on his elbows. "Jessa Albright, would you like to go on a date with me?" She tilted her head. "Where would we go?" "I'd take you to the diner on 5th because it has the best pie in town." "I already know that." "Then I'd ask you to tell me your favorite song and you'd say something obscure I've never heard of." "Probably. And then I'd fall for you all over again when you sang it in the parking lot." She leaned in and kissed his cheek. "I'd say yes. You already did." They sat in silence for a while, watching the clouds drift. The following weeks passed gently. Jessa's showcase had been picked up for regional rotation, and she began receiving invitations to small venues across the Pacific Northwest. Yarden worked remotely from their small rental house near the edge of town, transforming the sunroom into a makeshift office. He traded boardrooms for porch swings, espresso for diner coffee, and late-night strategy meetings for the sound of Jessa humming while she brushed her teeth. One afternoon, she returned from the studio to find him fixing the broken step on their porch with a level of focus usually reserved for acquisition deals. "You're getting better at using that drill," she said, setting down a bag of groceries. "I'm thinking of starting a side hustle. Millionaire carpentry." She laughed and leaned on the railing. "You miss it." He looked up. "The chaos? The noise? No. But I do miss knowing exactly what came next." "And now?" He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Now I wake up not knowing what song you're going to play or what ridiculous thing you'll say before you've had coffee. It's better this way." She walked over and tucked herself into his side. "They want me in Seattle next month. 3 shows. 1 weekend. Then we'll go." "You sure?" He kissed the top of her head. "Wherever you go, I go." They made it work. Yarden traveled with her when he could, setting up conference calls from green rooms and answering emails from backstage. When he couldn't, he sent flowers and voice messages that made her laugh between sets. She never asked him to choose between her and his world, and he never made her feel like she had to change. By the end of the year, the music blog that once called her a promising unknown now referred to her as the voice that found its way into our bones. She didn't chase fame, but it found her in the most unexpected, graceful ways. One morning, Yarden came into the kitchen carrying a small box. "I got you something." She looked up from her tea. "It's not our anniversary." "I know. But I saw these and thought of you." Inside the box were 3 guitar picks, each engraved with a word: brave, fire, and home. She turned them over in her palm, quiet for a moment. "You know what I see when I look at these?" she asked. "What?" "The story of us." He took her hand. "Then let's keep writing it." Their life wasn't perfect. Some days the power went out. Sometimes she forgot to return calls. Sometimes he missed meetings because he was too busy dancing with her in the living room. But it was theirs. They built a new studio together just outside town, big enough for hosting open mic nights and recording local talent. Jessa taught songwriting workshops for high schoolers. Yarden invested in small businesses that reminded him of what mattered most. That Christmas, they invited their friends, neighbors, and every musician Jessa had ever shared a stage with to a bonfire behind the studio. String lights hung between the trees, and someone brought a fiddle. Jessa sang barefoot again, just like the first night he saw her, and this time he joined in. They didn't need a spotlight. They had each other. And under the stars, wrapped in a blanket of music, laughter, and firelight, Yarden whispered the same words he said the night he almost left. "I love you." Jessa kissed him, her voice a promise against his lips. "I know."